There are a couple really interesting areas right now developing in intellectual property. So the first is just the patenting activity going on in blockchain. And then the second is sort of how blockchain can affect intellectual property. Sure. So we sort of covered the second one a little bit. But on the first one, for years, there's been this huge increase in the number of patents that are being applied for and issued on blockchain technologies, right? On improvements to blockchain. These typically, the patents that are being issued are typically falling into two categories. They're either sort of things that are improvements to sort of how you do blockchain, right? So some, algorithm for querying a blockchain really quickly, or some sort of blockchain related technology in that way, or they're applications of blockchain. So blockchain for supply chain, where you can track an object as it goes through the supply chain using a blockchain.
But these are all rooted in the blockchain.
Right.
The blockchain code.
These are blockchain related patents, right? So there are a lot of patents that have been, and this is just something that has been really increasing, as you would really expect, right? And so a lot of companies are really nervous that these patents can be used in a way that would be harmful for the blockchain ecosystem as a whole, right? And it's sort of, in many ways, a lot of people feel like the open source ethos of blockchain is not in line with the concept of patenting blockchain. Right. A lot of companies, their engineers do not like patents, right? In a lot of cases, and they're saying, they don't want their inventions to be patented. They're worried that down the line these patents are going to be used to sue companies that maybe are startups that are then not going to be able to pay legal fees that are going to go under. There are these things called patent trolls. Okay. So
I don't know.
All right. So since we're on this topic, that's one of the major concerns is that patent trolls are going to get blockchain patents. So a patent is basically just, a limited monopoly on an invention. So you invent something, and for X number of years, 20 years, you are able to exclude others from using that invention, regardless of whether they invented it independently, right? So if I patented a pen and you also came up with the idea for a pen and started making pens and maybe never knew about me or my patent, right?
But you got it first.
But I got a patent on it, right? I can sue you and say, no. You don't get to use pens. You have to pay me a bunch of money if you want to use pens, right? And this makes sense the fundamental concept of patents is that you are disclosing your invention to the public, right? In your patent, you're saying, here's how this works. And in 20 years, when my patent expires, my invention will be open to the public, right? Anyone can use it. And I'm disclosing this knowledge as opposed to keeping it a secret. In return, I'm getting a monopoly that's going to allow me to extract revenues from other people who want to use my invention. And therefore, I will be able to recoup my cost of R&D. So it makes total sense in the pharma context, right? You have a pharma company that spends $1 billion creating this drug. And the second that it says to the public, oh, we figured out that this chemical compound, does X, cures this disease, anyone can just go copy it. Yeah. So why would
without the research, without the development that they had to invest all that time and money into.
Right. So why would they, why would they spend $1 billion, right? The incentive wouldn't be there for them if they didn't have the ability to recoup that. So in that context, right, with that in mind, it makes sense that you have patents, right? It makes sense that you can see that the point of a patent is to incentivize innovation. And it makes sense in a pharma context. The problem is when you are talking about something like a software program that someone wrote in their basement overnight, right?
Yeah.
That's getting the same amount of protection as the $1 billion pharmaceutical drug, right? And what happens is there are a lot of, and often, right, these are written, let's say you have a pharmaceutical patent, okay, it's X chemical compound. It's pretty clear what you have invented, what you've got covered. Very different in a software context, right?
Because you're pretty much using the same resources as every other programmer out there.
Right. And it's also sort of easier to be kind of wishy-washy about it, right? Method for transferring data over a network. Well, what does that apply to? What did you actually invent? It has the ability to be really overbroad. So you've seen a lot of misuse of especially software patents, particularly from sort of the earlier days of the internet. And what that led to is these things called patent trolls. And patent trolls, the polite word for them is non-practicing entities, NPEs, or patent assertion entities.
I like patent trolls.
Patent trolls, right? No, right, exactly. Like some courts won't let you use the word, but luckily this is not that context. So patent trolls, it works really well because a troll is under a bridge and it is demanding money to cross the bridge. The idea is that a patent troll it's a company that does nothing. They don't have any product, service,
They don't
nothing.
produce anything.
They don't produce anything. Maybe it's just a lawyer, maybe it's just a guy, or some dude, right? They go and they buy a patent, or maybe they invented themselves, or whatever. But canonically, they buy a patent. Maybe a startup went under, for example. A startup went into bankruptcy. Their patents went on the market. A patent troll goes and buys this patent. It then goes to all these companies that are actually innovating, right? And it says, I have this patent for transferring data over a network, and you are clearly transferring data over a network, so you're going to have to pay me a bunch of money or I'm going to sue you.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because that's the whole point, is they can exclude others from using this technology. And obviously they didn't invent it, and they didn't, and it's maybe you as a company agree that you're doing the thing in the patent, or maybe you actually don't. Maybe you're like, no, actually, we're not doing that. We actually invented something that's a way different way of doing it, and we're doing it in a different way. The problem is, in order to get that settled, you're going to have to go to court, right? You're going to have to go fight a really lengthy battle and spend a lot of money. And, as a company, you have to make a decision. Yeah. Do you just pay them off to go away? And that's going to be a lot less than the attorney's fees.
Which is what they're banking on.
Right? Or do you fight it and spend a bunch of money? And by the way, at the end, even if you're totally right, the people who are deciding in traditional court cases, the people who decide whether your patent is valid and whether the company is practicing the patent is just jurors from just some guy. It's just a regular jury of people from that community. It's not technical experts.
Right.
And they could give a really huge amount of money to this, right? You're rolling the dice. You're hoping that this jury, right. So you can see why companies would not necessarily take that route and would potentially just pay them off. And that's why these patent trolls have proliferated. And this is a huge problem in the technology space, and something that a lot of people talk about. And so in the blockchain space, right, you can see why, starting years ago, seeing all these patents being filed, by startups that maybe are going to go under and maybe are going to have their patents put on the market and bankruptcy proceedings, right? Why that makes people in the industry so nervous.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, right. And so the idea is, so the question is, what do you do as an industry, right? When you have these patents, and there are all sorts of good reasons that you as a company would want to patent your invention, right? Your investors really want you to patent it. You want to make clear to future, if someone else wants to patent it in the future, right? You want to be really clear, no, we invented it first, right? So you want to have
just to set stipulations for the future.
Right, you want to have it on record in the patent office. Yeah. All sorts of good reasons you'd want to patent something. On the other hand, right, then you're sort of increasing the potential for patent trolls to get a hold of these in the future. And your engineers are not going to be happy with you often because they're, very into this open source ethos. So what do you do? And so there are all sorts of options that you have that are things that the blockchain industry has been looking into doing. And so there are various things you can do. You can do things called patent pledges, which is basically just patenting something, but then doing something with those patents that gives up some of your rights in them in some way. So, for example, Elon Musk made the news for just essentially pledging his patent portfolio to the public. He just said, I really think that in literally a blog post, he said, I think that the public space, I think that the electric car industry, could really benefit from everyone using this technology as a result. And as a result, Tesla will benefit because there will be more infrastructure out there for Teslas.
Oh, wow. I didn't know he did that.
Yeah, he did. And so he said, here you go, public. We've patented all this stuff, but it's dedicated to you. So that's a pure example of a patent pledge. Another thing you could do is that Twitter did is Twitter said, okay, we're going to give our inventors veto power over what happens to the patent down the line. So this is called the Innovators Patent Agreement. So they said, if you're an inventor and you invent a patent that gets, as a part of Twitter, as an employee of Twitter, and that gets patented and assigned to Twitter, we can't offensively assert it against anyone down the line, or it can't be offensively asserted against anyone down the line without your permission. Right? So they've given their inventors veto power. So that's another way where you can sort of have a patent pledge that gives up some right in your patent in order to be able to down the line make sure that the patents...
Can you give an example of that one? Like the Twitter example specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I'm an employee of Twitter, I invent something, it gets patented. It's actually, interestingly enough, this one's a little different than others. Interestingly enough, it actually is a clause in the employment contract, and it basically says their employment contract with the inventors say, you have the ability to veto any lawsuit we want to bring offensively in the future. So if we ever wanted to sue someone who hasn't already sued us, you get to say, no, you can't do that.
Regarding that patent.
Oh,
okay.
Right. Huh. Yeah. So that's one way to do it. Or you can have an entire industry. And by the way, on the Twitter Innovators Patent Agreement, there are blockchain companies that do that. For example, there's a blockchain company called Blockstream that has actually adapted Twitter's Innovators Patent Agreement and just made it more stringent. And so they actually are using Twitter's IPA. So that's one way you could do it. Or you could have everyone in the industry, right, opt into almost like a patent pool where everyone contributes all of their patents and says, so you can do this instead of, so the two examples I gave are unilateral, right? You're just giving up some of your own patent rights and you're getting nothing in return. But you could do this where the entire industry gets together and says, everyone who agrees to sort of give everyone else rights to their patents in this pool gets rights to my patents, right?
And you create this really interesting concept,
right? And so you're giving up some of your own patent rights to those other people in the network.
Oh, it's kind of like, is it GitHub? I can't remember. There's a platform online where a lot of developers will do this. They'll go online, they'll share their code with people so they can use the, whatever the small software piece it is, a plugin, whatever it is. Feel free to use it. But the entire point of the platform is like, you use my stuff, I can use your stuff. So it is open source, but I think it's more open source it is open source, but to the members or the people that take advantage of it.
Right. This is a way of doing essentially open source patent licensing is a good way of thinking of it. Like open source, but instead of for copyright, it's for patents. And you can do that in multiple, you can have it be, everyone has access to the patents. So there's something called the defensive patent license, which by the way, Blockstream is also a member of. So there are blockchain companies doing this. Where it's exactly as I described. Everyone just gets access to everyone else's patents. That actually has not been very popular to date, just because it's a collective action problem. There's also one called the License on Transfer Network. The idea is you can still sue everyone else in the pool, but instead of what you can't do is once you transfer it out to a patent troll, so let's say you're a startup, you're a member, you go under and your patent gets transferred to a troll. At that point, everyone else in the network gets a license, i.e. cannot be sued with the patent. Yeah. So that's like a really popular one. And there's also, the Open Invention Network does this for Linux. The Open Invention Network is essentially why Linux has become such a huge success. And the reason it's essentially created a patent no-fly zone around Linux technology. So for years, the blockchain industry has been talking about, well, how do we do that? How do we for blockchain basically create a no-fly zone with patents where we don't, as an industry, have to worry about a blockchain patent war really undermining innovation in the field. So that's
interesting.
That landscape. Yeah.
Are you able to give me an example of any cases that you guys have already tried or settled or whatever, that you can talk about publicly?
Yeah, so these aren't cases, right? These aren't like litigations, and to date there really hasn't been a pure blockchain patent lawsuit in the US. And these are rather industry groups that are trying to come up with some solution because they're really worried about the potential for patent litigation in the space. And particularly worried about startups, being extorted by patent trolls and going under and it quashing innovation. So what we do is, advise on, these types of strategies, what companies can do to, to collaborate to reduce the threat of patent litigation for everyone. And, to date, there are all sorts of things that are in the works, and this has been an ongoing thing for years. And this is actually how I first got involved in the blockchain space. Was I had written a paper called "Hacking the Patent System" that lays out all these options for startups and says here are the pros and cons of each possible patent pledge you can do. So this was published by the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Engine Advocacy, and as a result, had been asked to help the blockchain industry come up with some solution here. It's still in the works. There are various options. People, as I mentioned, Blockstream has already been opting into several of these options, and a lot of other companies are looking at it. Because if you're the general counsel of a blockchain company, right, you are under an extreme amount of stress from your investors to a lot of pressure to patent. There are a lot of good reasons for you to patent. In order to, make sure no one else gets there first, or even if you invented it first. And at the same time, your engineers are like, what? Yeah. You want to patent my invention? A lot of engineers see this as really being totally antithetical to the concept of open source, right? Which is at the heart of blockchain. And so you as a general counsel are under a lot of competing pressures. Yeah. And so what do? How do you patent stuff, but in an open source way? And the answer is these sort of potential strategies. So that's my super area of interest where all of the things I love are combined.
Yeah. Is this a conversation that is happening within the tech space and also with other law firms? I know obviously your firm is jumping into it. Do you know if other firms are?
Yeah, so I think generally I think lawyers generally are getting much more savvy very quickly about blockchain. So like in 2015, when I was doing blockchain law, and if you were a lawyer who knew anything about blockchain, you were just like,
you were the lawyer.
Yeah, you were the lawyer. Right? No, right, exactly. And I think it's still the legal field is definitely a little behind some of the other fields in terms of getting savvy with blockchain, but definitely a huge increase in the number of lawyers who are involved, which is great, especially as there will be more lawsuits and there's more regulation and policy considerations. And
yeah. Is there anything that you wish people would know, like the general public would know, just your position, maybe something that you have to explain all the time that you think, would make your job easier, just something that you wish the general population kind of knew about what you did, or the blockchain space, or the intellectual property space?
Yeah, I think that so there's this concept of privacy by design, right? Where you build in, and this is unrelated to blockchain, but like when you're building a product, you build in privacy to the design of the product, right? You don't build a product and then afterwards say, gosh, what are all the legal and what are all the privacy implications here, right? Rather, during the design process, you are thinking about privacy considerations and really making that part of the product itself. And I think that, especially in the blockchain space, there is a temptation to say, oh, well, blockchain is, not super regulated. And, or, that's the perception. This is something, we don't believe that, the laws should apply to us, right? There's this ethos around that.
Anarchy, type stereotype we were talking about.
Yeah. And I think that the thing is that, it is a much more productive strategy to think about how the laws are going to apply to you in advance, right? Rather than having lawyers come in and mop up the mess afterwards, but really have it be part of the design. And a lot of companies are doing that, particularly a lot of the more established players who are patenting in the space or the more established players in the space generally. And I think that's something that that companies should really keep in mind, that, ultimately, lawyers, are not necessarily just there to say, no, you can't do that, but really to help you design something thoughtfully to save you some trouble down the line.
Yeah. Are there any reoccurring other issues that we haven't brought up yet that you're dealing with a lot in your field that maybe I can't even think of that you're seeing?
So I think the major issue is, and the major tension at the moment is how regulation, I think there are a couple things. I think the first thing is how much regulation and what kind of regulation is the right regulation. Should industry be self-regulating, for example? So there are a lot of industry groups out there that are working on self-regulation and coming up with industry standards that allow the consumers to allow for sort of consumer protection without necessarily needing regulatory intervention, right? So a lot of people are collaborating. A lot of companies are collaborating to create these industry standards. So one of the groups, for example, is Global Digital Finance, GDF. And they've just published this really fabulous draft or several actually really fabulous drafts of these industry standards for various things, right? And, ultimately what you need there is industry-wide collaboration, right? Like you can do so much with, when you are collaborating as an industry. And so these trade groups, trade associations, are really vital. And they're also vital in developing things like standards, right? We talked about medical records earlier. I mean, that's a place where you really see the fact that there wasn't an adoption early on of technological standards, right? Meant that none of them did particularly well. Adopting a standard across an industry ultimately has benefits for everyone.
Sure.
So that's, I think, collaboration is something that's been a huge part of the narrative in the last, more and more increasingly. And I think that's huge and really important.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I mean, I think that is a ton of information as it is. And, so, I mean, you've answered a ton of my questions, given me a lot of clarity on things, and I'm sure our viewers a lot of clarity on blockchain, what you do as a blockchain intellectual property lawyer. So, I mean, thank you so much for just giving us all of that information. I think it's kind of a lot to digest, but also, to me anyway, it's making more and more sense the more that I look into it. The way I kind of look at it is becoming more part of our everyday. So it's just a matter of time, really, is the way I look at it.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's more and more, it's going to become a bigger and bigger part of our lives. And whether or not we see it at the surface level, blockchain will be a much bigger part. It's sort of the internet in 1992 now.
I was exactly I was just about to say that. We were just looking at a video of, it was Good Morning LA or some early morning talk show back in the 80s or 90s, and I think it was Katie Couric and a couple other people that are still working today, and they're literally asking the questions, what is email? And they show the @ symbol, and they're like, so I think you create a name and then this thing and then it sends it, okay, whatever, we'll see. And
right, email is a great analogy, right? Email is a great analogy to cryptocurrency as the first use case of blockchain,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
email is the first sort of really wide use case of the internet, but you can see that there's so much more you can do. And it's a lot like the internet in that like the internet sort of made information really the internet really made it took the transaction costs of transferring information and made them near zero.
Yeah.
And blockchain is taking the transaction costs of transferring value and making it near zero.
Yeah.
So just like you can send a movie as an attachment to an email, suddenly you can send value without, in the same way.
Wow.
And so I think it's a really good analogy when you
Yeah.
compare it to like the internet in 1992. That's where we are in blockchain right now.
20, 30 years from now, it's going to be like nothing.
Right, and it may
Yeah.
just be, right, and there may be, better versions of
Yeah.
it or different, but this is definitely something that's like a huge part of
Yeah.
technological development, certainly in the next couple of years.
Well, it's exciting to be on the forefront of it. So thank you so much for giving us that breakdown.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure and
Yeah,
like
of
so
course,
fun
of
to talk about.
course.
My favorite thing to talk about. So
Good. That's what we like.
Yeah.
That is what we like. So thank you so much. We'll have to have you come back on, get into the weeds even more down the road.
Great, I would love that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.